All right. Good afternoon, everybody. We will go ahead and get started. I think it's 4. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Brianna Lathrop. I am a family nurse practitioner, and I'm the CEO of Good Samaritan Health Center in Atlanta, Georgia. And if you were at my session last year, warning in advance, there's a bit of repeat, but the number of responses and emails after last year's session on organizational culture was overwhelming in the best possible way. So as Rick and I were chatting about this conference, it just seemed like this was just a topic that we needed to continue to discuss. This year, because there was so much that I wanted to leave more space for other people's ideas and contributions. So I'm going to skip over some of like the big picture, evidence-based, why culture matters, because I think if you're in this room, you've decided that organizational culture matters. That way, my goal is to spend the majority, almost all of our time, really talking about strategies. How do we define culture? How do we measure it? And then how do we do something about it? I do have no financial disclosures, only the disclosure that to me, culture is an ongoing practice, right? Like I am not done learning, and culture at Good Samaritan isn't perfect, and it never will be. It won't be for your organizations either. And so I hope that this is a space where while I certainly want to share my own personal learning and some of the practices that have been effective where I work, my hope is that this is also a space where we're learning from each other, and I hope to leave better equipped as well. So let's talk a little bit about culture. I think Rick in our opening session actually gave the perfect introduction to what's going on right now. I don't know about you, but it seems like it's just getting harder to do what we do. That there has never been a harder year for the people that we serve, the amount of fear and grief and loss and mourning in our community, and holding that and the reality of that. Not surprisingly, we know staff burnout is an issue. All the surveys, whether it's medical assistants to pharmacists to administrators to providers, most of the studies I pulled, burnout rates were anywhere from 40 to 60%, with actually pharmacy being on the highest end, primary care kind of right in the middle of that 40 to 60. None of those percentages are sustainable or acceptable if we want to continue robust primary care in the US, particularly in the environments where all of us serve and practice. As things get harder, we also remember that our teams carry trauma, and they carry both the trauma of their own lived experience, that remember many people that are in our organizations are there because they have seen this happen in their communities and want to be a part of the work that restores and heals. But you compound that on the fact that all day long, our patients, whether they're checking people in or whether providers or counselors in the room, also hear the stories of our patients. And we share those stories with one another. You know, our staff will say, hey, we need to pray for so-and-so. They asked that I let you all know so we can pray. Or did you know that so-and-so has to leave? This will be their last visit. In this country, we want to make sure they feel loved and sent off, and that our staff then holds that secondary trauma of what patients bring in and their situations in need. Healthcare itself continues to just generate more things. There are just more boxes to check off. And whether you're in FQHC or in the free and charitable world, you are constantly reporting. Donors need more data, their demands are higher, reimbursement gets more challenging. To stay open, we have to go after every single penny, and we spend more and more time, all these promises that like EMR will speed us up, just add to this task list. I was sharing a flight with one of my board members on the way here, and I had Athena open because of course I did, because I had an hour in the airport and it will not be wasted. And she looked over, she's like, oh, nice tax box number. And I was like, my tax box number is currently 850. She was like, oh no, that's great. But I mean, just to put in perspective, like when 850 feels like a good number, like we've got an issue of like how much is in these inboxes. And like, they don't go away. Like, your goal is just like, if I can kind of chip away before the next batch. And that cycle can feel really daunting. And I think that in addition to that, I think there's a few unique things in this community that I think deserve just being called out as we hold this tension of how do we create workplaces that feel loving and caring and inspiring and create places where people want to work long term. As I think often, we can think a lot about like, what do our patients need and what are the challenges facing our communities? And we're community clinics, we should do that. But I am always reminded that the line between who is a patient, who is a staff member is very blurred. Often they are the same. And so that when we see new challenges facing our communities or whether it's economic trends or violence in the neighborhood, that I remember it's not just the patients walking in the room with these burdens and concerns, but it is my staff. And I spend a lot of time kind of studying and learning about social determinants of health. And we talk about those stress pathways, that the chronic stress of poverty, of oppression, of racism makes physical changes in the body that then get passed down. That's part of the pathology behind these larger social drivers. And I think that story doesn't exist just for patients, that is happening inside the bodies of our staff members often as well. And then I think the real challenge is that sometimes what our community needs the most works in direct opposition to what my staff needs the most. And I'm going to give you an example, is that I was in a national leadership training program through the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation right as the pandemic hit. So we had this 3-year program that clearly got flipped on its head because all of us found ourselves in very different situations than when we'd signed up for this leadership position. And there was an open conversation, and these were leaders from across the country, and it was not healthcare specific. And actually, there were very few people that were any kind of healthcare or even direct service roles. It was a lot of community nonprofits, amazing work, advocacy organizations. And they started saying, like, how do we make sure that we're responsive to our staff during this pandemic? And the group's conclusion was that, like, if you were just hiring from your community, then you didn't even have to worry about that you were just going to do the right thing because you had the right people in the organization. And I remember just thinking, like, that is not my experience. Like, what my community needs is like hundreds of COVID tests a day. What my community needs is for us to somehow run telehealth full time so that everybody can get their chronic disease management while keeping enough providers on acute triage because the hospitals are full, and that we have a large patient population of individuals experiencing homelessness that don't have telehealth. So we have to like stay open. None of those things exactly promote the safety of my staff. Obviously, the more people they're seeing and the more often they're working in triage, the higher the risk. None of that promote their mental health or safety during the pandemic, but that's what our community needs. Now, it's not always quite so extreme, but it was just a reminder that we hold that tension in our organizations. And I think that we are reminded that, like, as we talk about this, that we don't get to the end goal on this side of heaven, right? Like, we won't work in places that are just filled with no resistance and no conflict and always be joy and peace. And like, that's okay. Like, God told us that. That's not a surprise. But at the same time, it is also not a discouragement that there are still tools and practices and rituals that help build as close as we can get for the time that we're here to serve. So when I say culture, I think, I am implying in the title, because, you want your title to fit on a piece of paper. But I'm implying when I say culture is like a good one, right? Like, nobody signed up to be like, how do we build bad organizational culture? It implies that we all are here and care about good or healthy or God-based or mission-focused. Insert the word of what you want your culture to be. But we are always building culture. Culture exists, and our ability and our goal is to direct how it occurs. So when I think about, okay, how do I define or how do I know culture is good at the organization? There's a few things that we look at. Is one, that the research does very clearly correlate that when providers are feeling good about their roles, when staff culture feels healthy, when motivation and engagement is high, patient outcomes are higher. I think we've all probably experienced this in our lived experience, but I always like to think about that it is unreasonable to ask staff to show up and be compassionate and show empathy and think about the whole person and see the humanity and God and God's image in one another if they experience none of those things as a staff member, right? And so thinking about, especially in my role, that while I see patients, I'm also thinking about that my staff is like a patient in that sense too, that I want to make sure they experience what I hope our patients experience. Certainly, an engaged staff means lower turnover. Turnover is exhausting, and there's some turnover that happens that can be even good or planned for. A lot of us use gap year students, right? Like, we are always managing an amount of expected turnover. If you add burnout turnover over that or dissatisfaction on top of that, turnover becomes an exhausting cycle and burns out your leadership as well. Another sign of good culture is internal advancement. Are people gaining skill sets? Is there internal mobility in the organization? I love our staff members on staff that I'm like, they've had 3 or 4 job titles since they've been with us. I'm an example of that, right? Like, there was space in the organization for me to grow and become something new. And I want to make sure that that is in place for those that are coming along to fill leadership positions in the future. Organizational growth. Are we fulfilling our strategic plan? Are we living out our mission? When outcomes are falling, whether they're financial ones or whether it's patient census or whether it's QA projects, sometimes those are factors outside of our control, but many of them are at least partially influenced by our organizational culture. Spiritual growth and encouragement. Like, do we have staff asking good questions? Do we have staff engaged with one another? Do we know that people have a place or a person that they can pray with? And also our patient satisfaction. Most of us measure that in one way or another. And again, patients are going to reflect what they experience in our organization, which is also a reflection of the culture that we have built. So, and finally, high employee satisfaction, which is what we'll talk about next, is the tools we're using at Good Sam and strategies for measuring this. This is kind of my, no evidence base here, didn't pull this from a journal, but this is what I use as how do I continue to come back to what does culture mean for me and how do I gauge it at Good Samaritan? So I want us to be a place where employees feel deeply connected to our mission, which is spreading Christ's love through quality healthcare to those in need, and to our community, and are able to do their work to the best of their ability. And then employees find the organization, so Good Sam for us, is a place that moves them closer to God. That everyone's spiritual journey is looking different, and there are hard times and drier times and times of joy, and that will ebb and flow, but is the tract that because they work here, they feel like that experience has brought them closer to God. That's what I'm praying for our organization. And so this is kind of the definition that I bring myself back to each year as I kind of reflect on how are we doing around our culture and employee satisfaction. So as you were warned, this is participatory, but the first part, no one's going to be forced to share. If you have paper or if you take notes on your tablet or your phone, however you like to do it, I'm going to be quiet for 2 minutes, and I'd like you to just popcorn list off things that happen at your organization that promote a positive organizational culture. These could be basic factors, activities, practices, traditions. Just as fast as they come to your mind, write them down. 20 more seconds. All right, keep that list handy. We're going to come back to it. So there are not a whole lot of measures of culture, right? Like we are looking at all of those factors that I listed, from patient outcomes to turnover. But I think one tool that has been really helpful to me in recent years is also asking our employees, how does it feel to work here? It's the same reason we ask patients how they're feeling. We ask about their satisfaction. We have screening tools. That tools are helpful ways of assessing how we're doing around culture and employee experience. And it also communicates that we care and that we want that information. I'll give an example. I see patients about 50% of my time at Good Sam. And about close to a decade ago, we implemented universal depression screening. And you know, that's a decade ago now. It's part of, like, it's a vital sign. But I remember thinking, like, oh, I assessed for this, right? Like, this is great. This is important. We can add this. And I was amazed at the number of patients that started talking to me about symptoms that they'd never brought up before, because it just didn't occur to them that, like, primary care was a place that you would talk about feeling depressed, right? And it wasn't necessarily the first time they saw the screening tool. It was after they were like, oh, are they going to keep asking me this every time I come to the clinic? Maybe they want to know. So I also say this to say that even if you don't always have the exact right question on your employee survey, the ritual of doing it opens up the conversation to give us feedback. Even if it doesn't come on this, we do have an open-ended section at the end of our annual employee feedback survey where people can just express other thoughts. But I think what it does is it helps create a reminder that, like, no, we care and we are measuring this intentionally. So just a little bit about the tool we use. I'm going to actually show you the questions on the next slide. But what we use is like a 10-point Likert scale. And we've pulled these questions from national databases so that we can actually correlate them to, like, US norms and standards. It gives you just like a baseline. And what you're looking at are kind of your high scores, your promoters. They're driving the culture. There's the detractors. They're hurting or dragging down your culture. And then there's neutral. And they're doing fine. They're coming, they're doing their work. They might not be the drivers of the organization, but they're along and they're satisfied. And so then what you do is you calculate for each of the questions a net promoter score. And this is kind of a fairly standard, like, how you would measure this. Your zeros to negative, you can go as low as negative 100. Those are your, like, you need to fix this. Like, this is a culture problem. Your 10 to 30 is considered, like, okay, like, that's not going to drown your organization. Nothing amazing, but, like, people are engaged. The overall atmosphere is happy enough. Then you get into the 30 to 50, and that's like we are doing good. Like, this is a sweet spot. 50 to 100 is actually statistically very unlikely to occur. So you're probably never going to get an annual survey where every question would have an above 50. If you are, please lead this next year. But that 50 to 100 is your exceptional employee experience. And I always say that, like, while I know statistically we're not getting 50s and above on everything, I'm not going to stop trying. So in our employee feedback survey, we ask things like, how long do you plan to work at Good Sam? We ask, like, how well do you feel about your job performance? How well do you feel about your other people's job performance? Overall satisfaction. And then we ask these questions. And again, we didn't write any of these. A few we modified the language to fit a little better our work, because these are used for all sorts of industries. But everything like the mission of my clinic makes me feel my job is important. I know what's expected for me at work. I have the materials and equipment I need to do my job right. I love this one. At work, I have the opportunity to do what I do best every day. In the last 7 days, I've received recognition or praise for good work. My supervisor or someone at work seems to care about me as a person. There is someone at work who encourages my development. At work, my opinions seem to count. I have a best friend at work. In the last 6 months, someone has talked to me about my progress. In the last year, I've had opportunities to learn and grow. At work, I'm treated with respect. My organization cares about my overall well-being, and I have received meaningful feedback in the last year. What I'd like you to do now is take 1 minute, and I want you to kind of link the list that you wrote down to like 1 or 2 of these that it seems to fit. So if you're like, oh, we do a monthly Employee of the Month recognition, that falls under, in the last 7 days, I've received recognition, right? Like that's a recognition strategy. So just take a quick minute to just kind of loosely map your list to some of those criteria. What I'm hoping you're starting to notice is there's probably areas that have like a clear linkage, or you've got several things in one category. And that there may be an area where you're like, I have nothing under that category. Like I can't think of a single strategy we're doing to help this. It doesn't mean it's going badly, but it means that there hasn't been maybe an intentional practice or process put in place. That was a fast version so that we can wrap up within our hour allotted, but it is a great exercise even with teams at work, whether it's a leadership team or even just the department as a whole, to get feedback on like what's going well. It's really a strength-based way of talking about culture, is saying, okay, what's going well? Let's put that into some categories that we care about. What categories are missing? And now as we do this feedback, we sit as a leadership each year and we look at like, where are those low scores? And then we take that back to our staff and say, help us figure out how this score goes up. So what I'd like to do is I have kind of narrowed down those questions, because there's a lot of them, into about 10 categories broadly of like what they represent. And I'm going to share with you a few of the practical strategies that we've implemented. And then if you've got something on your list, I'm going to pause at the end of each, and I'd love for someone to just like shout out, hey, this is cool. I think it matters because we all represent organizations of different sizes and types. My organization has 58 employees. Some of you have 5 employees, and some of you have 800 if you're Lawndale. And so some are scalable, and some don't make sense for huge orgs, some don't make sense for little orgs. But a lot of times you can say, okay, maybe we can't do this at a staff meeting, but we could do it at a department huddle. Or maybe we don't have enough people to fully do this, but we could modify this version. So that's why I think it's important too that I would love for others to share their experiences. As I get into the specifics, I did just want to add a few big picture strategies that have helped drive some of our work around this issue. Is that a thriving culture stops the moment you stop actively building it. That culture is gonna be there. And that the moment we say like we're good enough, or the moment we take our eyes off of it, like there is too much against us. The world is too broken, and the work is too difficult, that when we stop trying, we start sliding a different direction. that culture starts at the start. One thing we worked on really hard about 2 years ago was really reframing our onboarding so that while it, yes, is a checklist of things we need to do and all the legalities of onboarding a new employee, we started saying, how do we want an employee to feel after their first full day inside Good Samaritan? And it meant it changed that we focused more on that initial tour. How many people could they shake hands with and say hi to? We make an effort to make sure that they leave being like, whoa, this is a cool place. Like, I want to engage here, versus being like, wow, I sat through a lot of PowerPoint presentations and signed my life away. Obviously, you have to do some of that too, but it really changed how we did onboarding when we said, what do we want people to feel, instead of just what do we need people to do. I think we touched on this, that it will never be perfect, but don't give up. And I think reminding one another of that. And that I think there is often, and I am a glass half full person, and I think as kind of my right-hand person at work would say, I'm probably a glass like 3/4 full person. Like, it can be like mostly empty and I'll be like, no, this is gonna be great. But what I have learned is that a really important piece too is like the vulnerability and naming when things aren't okay. That I think sometimes we hurt culture when we pretend things are okay when they are not. This is especially hard when we know we might be part of the problem or we don't have a solution. But I know that's a space that at least in leadership, I've been trying to lean into a lot more, is saying like, this isn't going great. And that's okay. We can acknowledge that and we can hold that and we can feel that tension. It doesn't mean it always won't be okay. But I think people need to know that that hurt and that tension they experience is seen. That you can't build culture without trust and transparency. And so letting people know, we talk about org culture, we talk about employee satisfaction, we share the results on a large screen, good or bad. Like, there's this idea that like all of us build culture and all of us have a say in this and a shared vision. One thing that we've talked a lot about at church this year that I've started thinking about in the terms of work is that joy is also a form of resistance to brokenness. And that it is, you can like talk about how hard the day was with patients, and then you can celebrate your colleague's birthday because they are a beautiful and incredible person, right? And that like you can have a full-on party in the hardest year of your life, and that like that is also a way that we build within us resiliency. And so just naming and holding that truth. And that leadership can't drive culture alone. You'll have a hard time driving culture with no leadership input or leadership working against it. But remember the number of those questions that didn't depend on a leader. Like, I have a best friend at work. Somebody in the organization cares about me. It's never going to be one person that can be that to all people. And so to me, it is a reminder that there are culture drivers in your organization who don't share any leadership title, and maybe that is you. And that is a gift, and you have more power over the culture than you likely think that you have. I learned this phrase that I like a lot, being soft on the people but hard on the work. And again, it is just a posture that we don't have to give up on the outcomes or that the work needs to get done, but we can still acknowledge our shared humanity, and we can name when things are hard, and we can find within ourselves the type of compassion we have when our patient comes back and says, yes, I didn't take any of those medicines, I didn't check my sugar. Like, part of my heart's like, oh, we just lost 3 months. But like part of my heart is like, what happened in 3 months that like your uncontrolled diabetes couldn't even get on your radar? And I try to say, let me take that same approach when someone walks into my office and I'm like, so we need to talk about what just happened. It doesn't make a lot of sense, like what were we thinking? And that like there is also a story there too. And so holding that the accountability must stay, but we can acknowledge that people also need space and guidance at that time. And then one that I've added recently to just my own practices are that while we care about how people start, it also matters how people end. And I have really reflected on like, how do I treat and talk about and honor when people leave the organization? It's never convenient when someone leaves, right? And sometimes they leave because they got into med school, hooray. Sometimes they leave because they have a life that they're balancing. And I think it is a temptation, and it is a hard piece in our type of work to like name that like it's okay. It doesn't discount what you did if you don't do it forever. And like, it is okay to give 10 years of your life to this and then say, I have to focus somewhere else. And that doesn't negate who you were or what you did for our organization. And I think too often we communicate to people that that's exactly how it is. And so we've been really reflectful in our process of honoring people's exits as well, and that they feel celebrated and loved. Many of them stay patient, and that's a whole thing. Former employees still coming back through the building, and like we have worked and lived in that tension to say that like you are a part of this family, and your work is meaningful no matter how long it goes. So with that in mind, I'd like to jump to some kind of practical tips. And so one of those first questions was the mission of the organization makes my work feel of value. Like, am I connected to the mission? Some of the strategies that we've done around this is that mission alignment starts with the hiring process. Like all job descriptions posted have our mission in the first line. It's on the application. We talk about it in the interview. We talk about it in onboarding, that people walk in the door with no surprises. And like, if they don't know anything else about us, they have heard our mission statement a whole lot of times by the time they're walking in the door. And that it has to continue to be visible in the things we print and how often we recite it and read it, that just becomes like there's no question of what our mission statement is in the organization. And that our mission statement is short enough that the average person can roll it off the tongue and memorize it helps as well. Also just storytelling. I think too that especially as organizations grow, we start to see less and less of each other's work. And so creating spaces, publications, newsletters, time for sharing, so that we start to hear like, oh, cool, look what dental team experienced this week. Like maybe I don't work over there, but I'm a part of a culture that enabled a patient to have that kind of life-changing experience. Like many of you, we have a daily devotion that starts our day, and we rotate so that every staff member, your name comes up about every other month, takes a turn leading that devotion. And that time is protected and it's paid. Like you're clocking in and you're going to devotion. And it's our way of saying, this is important enough that it's the first part of our day and it's paid time for you. It never compromises. Like when we had to really quick teach everybody what to do if ICE came in the building, we opened patient care 10 minutes late that morning. We didn't stop devotion, right? Like there's a culture of this is grounding all of the rest of the work we do. And then creating space for just the diversity of ways that people express and connect with Jesus. Our medical director regularly plays her violin as part of her devotion because she helps lead worship at her church. It's this beautiful moment of experiencing God through music. And so it's really fun to also see how devotion can sometimes help us experience God through the eyes of another person. Anyone else have anything on their list around mission that's been really effective for their organization? All right, I'm gonna let you off easy on this. Well, there we go for it. Amazing. So just repeating that into the microphone for the recording, that having a designated time where all of the staff can be in the same room and that connecting point. Anything else that clinics have done around mission that's been really helpful to connecting people? Yeah, go right ahead. Mm. That's awesome. So this is a staff retreat. And is that like all services are closed during that day for this retreat? Very cool. Was there another hand over? Yes. Okay, awesome. Yeah. Yeah, that ritual, and people know that it's there, right? They know that there's a space for their prayer requests and to set that day up in that way. The next category falls under equipped for work. So this would be like, I have the materials that I need to do my work well. I can do what I do best every day at work. And I think that, one learning point for me has been that physical environment matters. And that like making sure that desk chairs are like not broken and everyone gets their own and can label it with their name, like significantly improves morale. And so I think sometimes we neglect some like low-hanging fruit, or we say like, we're a tight line, we're not gonna spend money that way, that sometimes a little bit of money to improve an immediate work environment can make a big difference. Our MAs decorate their workstations and they're like personalized and they reflect their personalities and interests, and it's like a way that they get to feel themselves in their physical space. Also opportunities to influence your workspace. We recently did a renovation of our building, and it involved a lot of what is our guest services or front desk space. And so we had the front desk team talk about like, what do they wish they had? And one of their big asks were that right now the only coffee center downstairs was right between medical and dental. And they felt like it wasn't as much their space. So they got their own, and I mean, they have decorated it and they brought in accessories, and like that it was a way that that department felt seen and felt like they were valued the same way our medical and dental teams were. Same, we're in a new construction project right now that will involve some storage for our farm, and our farm team actually sat with our architects and talked about like, what is a usable cold storage room? Because like, I don't know, I don't farm or put things in cold storage, but they do. Annual goal setting is part of our employee review, and so getting to know and making sure supervisors know like, what are people's goals for themselves? How do they hope to grow and thrive? And aligning interests with needs. Like sometimes we'll find out that somebody has like a gift or a talent and it might not be part of their daily job. We have an MA who I happen to know does art on the side because I've taken time to get to know her because she brings it up in her annual review. Because we ask, what are you doing with your life? Not just what are you doing with Good Sam? And so recently we had a staff member that was leaving, and we actually, sometimes we'll pull money as a department to do a little going away gift. We actually commissioned her to do like a really cool painted piece that was like so meaningful and like a way for her to use her gifts. So like there's just small ways that sometimes gifts you don't normally associate with the needs of your organization can be used. Any other, I know this is a little harder one on the fly, but anything else that comes to mind under like equipping people to do their work well? We will keep moving on. Expectations. So I know what is expected from me at work. And I think that this one actually has always been, when we started doing this, I was surprised by how many people scored this low. And when we first started assessing this, because I was like, what do you mean? You're a doctor or you're a dental assistant. Like, you don't know what's expected. And then I thought like, well, when was the last time we sat down and talked to anybody about their job description, right? So we took a year, and at every annual review, we updated the job description. And then we started asking people like, do you feel like there's things not on this job description that you're doing? Either is the job description wrong, or like, why are you feeling pressured to do things that aren't there? Do we need to rethink your role? And that was just a really helpful conversation. Also, onboarding, we've really, as we've worked on that process, really doing 30-day check-in, 60-day check-in, 90-day check-in, because it is easy just to have a new employee, you get through those 30 days, you're like, yes, it's working. And like 90 days in, you're like, this is great. And they're like, I have no idea if anybody here likes me or that I'm doing the right job, that they need that check-in for reinforcement. We also at annual reviews started asking people, not everybody needs regular check-ins. Some people need more than less. Some people are like, cool, I'll see you next year. And some people are like, can we please have a quarterly check-in? Because I get inside my head and I convince myself I am not good enough within a 3-month period of time. And customizing check-ins based on people's personalities and needs. Also peer accountability, working with a lot of kind of our on-the-floor managers, even if their job title isn't management, but they've worked there a long time, helping coach them on like, how do you correct things in the moment? So that people, that we always say like your annual review should never be a surprise, because like we are talking throughout at multiple levels, and that peer-to-peer accountability matters. And then regular sharing of goals and outcomes. I do a lot of work on our data collection and grant management and tracking, but a lot of that is invisible if you're not interested. You don't look at data or it's not in your job description. And so for example, we have a big grant right now around HIV and hepatitis C testing, and we now print a colorful, fun little one-pager on what were our goals and how many did we test and what was the outcome of that. And we hand it out at the medical department meeting each month. And so it just connects providers that we're asking to make sure they miss 0 opportunities for HIV testing to get monthly feedback and reminders of this grant and this is what we're measuring. So I think that can be really helpful for people to connect what they're doing day to day to the bigger picture of why and the expectations around it. Anything else from anyone around how to clearly communicate expectations or make sure that, that people feel they know what's expected for them? All right, we'll keep moving. This care and well-being encompasses a few of them. So feeling that someone cares about my well-being. That is the one that I look at first when I open that report every year, more than overall satisfaction. And I think this has a lot to do with how do we help people not burn out. And there's a lot of strategies. We are open 6 days a week, and we're a staff of 58, which is including our contract and part-time employees in that number as well. So we do on and off weekends. So one weekend you work all the way through, and then one weekend you're off for the Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. So really building in a regular period of true rest and disconnection from work so that you can truly be engaged when you come back in. It also helps for people that want to go back to school or have certain hobbies or things they like to do outside of work to have a little better space carved out to do those kind of dream projects. We also devote at least 2 staff meetings a year just to personal growth. We call the bank that keeps our endowment, and we have their financial coaches come over and talk about how to buy a car and buy your first home. It has nothing to do with training our staff to take care of patients, but staff get financial literacy information, and we hire a lot of young people. We are a lot of people's first jobs. And so just creating a culture that says sometimes you have time away from patients and we're learning together, and it's just for the benefit of a thriving community of people. We also do allow our staff to access our services. Most of our staff members do their health care at Good Sam. Almost all of them do their dental care at Good Sam. The only thing we do not provide is the mental health counseling isn't done with our counselors, but we do subscribe to WeConnect. So in addition to our health insurance, we do offer a telehealth program for mental health to make sure that all of our employees have that access. We work really, really hard on a benefit package, and it's getting harder and harder, as you all, I'm sure, are seeing as well. But I always ask myself as I look at those numbers, what do I wish the employers of my patients were doing? What would make their health better? And one of the answers to that is making sure that our employees have benefits and that we communicate and over-communicate how the benefit package works, how the decisions get made around that, the value of those benefits. We even do a session on how to use your benefits. We help our employees learn how to find a provider, how to download the app so that we can make sure that employees are getting the most out of the benefits that we offer. And then another big space that we put a lot of thought into is we have moved to a living wage model, meaning that instead of, for our hourly positions, instead of looking at market rate, we have set a living wage minimum for Atlanta, and that nobody at the organization will make less than that. And I will say that when we did the math and presented what that looked like to the board, it was a whole lot less money than the impact on the lives to those people. It helps them be able to live where they work in our city. It's getting harder and harder to live there. And it helps them be able to thrive as employees at our organization. And I do think that, compensation is a tricky subject, and it's different for every organization. Some orgs are just starting, and it's someone's project, and they have sufficient income from other sources, and that's amazing, but a lot of the people that we are hiring do not. And so that it does matter that we continue to monitor what our wages look like. And especially when we want to promote that people within our communities can also work for us, that we need to make sure that we're keeping pace, so that's a reality for those that may want to join our team. Other thoughts from all of you about things that you do that you think promote the well-being of your staff or care? I know there's got to be some on this one, because I've heard them. Yeah. Oh, that's cool. That's awesome. So that was standing and like walking setups at the desks so that people can be like moving during their workday. That's a great example. Others? Anything else around well-being? Yeah.
We have flexible hours so that people have elderly parents and take them to doctor's appointments and stuff. We can flex around those kind of things.
That's awesome. And that's something medicine doesn't always do very well. So that's huge. That was flexible hours that people, whether they're caring for elderly or children, have some flexibility. So the next is, oh, go right ahead. Yeah. Yeah, so for us, what it looks like is that we have on and off weekends. So like our staff come in and they work the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Then they're off Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. Then they come back and work Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So it means that every other weekend is a 4-day weekend. So it allows that kind of more complete separation. Sometimes you get to the weekend, you're like back at work before you realize it's the weekend. Recognition, I will say that this is, for me, one of the hardest ones because like the larger your staff, the harder it is to recognize people, and people's need for recognition varies significantly. I don't think it ever gets filled, right? Like there's no getting everyone's cup filled all the way, but we can try. Every bit counts. We do, and I think the key to recognition is having it come from a variety of sources and ways, because different people receive recognition more one way or from one source than another. We do every Wednesday, right after devotion, we do peer-led kudos, which are just like shout outs. And they can be anything from like someone helped me change my tire in the parking lot to like I was struggling with a patient and someone took over because I could feel myself escalating, and just like everything in between. There's no rules on it and it's just open. It's really fun. We've also tried to just set more rhythms of things we do routinely so that recognition isn't always have to be thought about, it's built in. Like we do VVOX where everyone takes out their phone, and at staff meetings we put up people's names when it's their birthday and they type in messages and favorite words, and then we print and frame it for them. So each year they have a cloud of words that the staff have used to describe them. Each month for people's anniversary, we have their supervisor answer 3 questions, and we change them every year. This year, one of the questions is a loving message from a peer, and so it's now that we've done it a few years, it invites someone else on staff to say a few words as well. Again, that's printed, they get to keep it. I started, just because I'm always looking for ways to increase our recognition list, I write a personal letter to everyone on their anniversary each year, and just give that to them so that they have something too from like leadership to know how they're valued. And I really strive to make those like customized individual to like who I see them and like where I know they're really like living into our organization. We have a patient recognition program where people can submit like, hey, I just want to tell my nurse practitioner, Katie, that like she saved my life, or just like I was feeling really down today and my dental hygienist made me smile. And then we share those out loud at staff meetings. I think too, just a culture of gratitude, trying to talk about that sometimes recognition can be as simple as like thankfulness. I think sometimes we say like, and I hear this from really good leaders that like, why do people need recognition for like doing the job they get paid for? And like, I hear that from people I respect and care about, but like also, I always think, like, what is the harm to in just expressing that, like, I'm thankful they're doing their job and that they're here, right? And so, like, one of my personal practices is every day I see patients, when I finish with my MA, I'm like, thanks so much for working with me today. And I find one thing that they, like, helped me with that I name. Like, I really appreciate that, like, you called out that I hadn't put the culture in on that urinalysis. Like, I would have lost the chance to get that result, but, like, you were watching out for my back. And then also we have had some fun with like social media. Like we'll do little call outs, like share your favorite thing about Good Sam, and we'll like feature somebody in just ways that they, it helps our marketing team, but it also helps people connect. And then also celebrating as a clinic. Like we had 10-year celebration of our homeless outreach program, and like we took everybody to a restaurant, and like we just celebrated together that like we did this and we've done it for 10 years. And like I think the moments for celebration are really important. I know we're close on time, but anyone have any other thoughts on like recognition or celebration? Yeah.
I think we've done teams as a whole. We got a whole team on there, and anybody at any time throughout the day, but anything that they've noticed that another person is doing for our patients. And so it's made simple as, hey, thanks to so-and-so, the driver, noticed that so-and-so wasn't feeling so well. We were able to connect them. It's not big things.
Right. Oh, I love that. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. So that's a great question. Yeah, we actually talk a lot about that with our leadership team is when we have new ideas, like how do we share that? So like this year with annual employee recognition, we talked about like, hey, it's getting a lot to do this every month. And so then we said, well, what if one of the questions was someone else gets to write something? And the staff were like, cool, we've never been invited. We're like ready to write. And so it like took that off. And then because we do a lot of it live, it's like everybody's cell phone. So like that birthday cloud got generated in 1 minute by everybody sitting out there. And then one person was in charge of like hitting print on the color printer, and the frames are pre-ordered and you stick it in. So like, I think it is always when you have an idea, thinking through that process. That's a great point. So I'm going to go here for those last couple a little quicker. Opportunities for growth. We do continuing education funds for every single employee every year. We do $200, and then we do more for licensed providers that need it to continue their licenses. We also do a lot around opening job applications and letting our staff know when positions are open so that everyone feels invited to those first. Looking for opportunities for cross-training, that sometimes there isn't a position to move up to, but there is a way to develop a new skill. Training opportunities during work hours, like we did mental health first aid training, and we did a half of staff at the time so that we didn't have to close the clinic, but everybody got that full day of training, and they all have that certificate that they get to keep. For conferences like this and external experiences, even for some of our health fairs in the neighborhood, we now post them and we say, apply. A quick one-pager, let us know why you want to be the person going. And so it's not just our outreach team that can participate and go out and get a new experience, it's anyone on staff. And then just regularly assessing learning needs and goals, which we do during our staff meeting. I've talked a bit about evaluation throughout this, but we do an annual evaluation. It includes a self-evaluation. And I think that, that the other thing that we work really hard on is sometimes when things aren't going well, that I think we often have learned like performance plans are tools towards firing safely, but really changing that culture to say, no, performance plans are that we want you to thrive and be here for the long term. And that's how I introduce them. My opinion seems to count. I do a lot with, I send a monthly email to all our staff so that there's transparency, that people know what decisions are being made and why they're happening. We do a ton of live polling at meetings, so asking for feedback or questions. I love live polling because you can see it up on the screen. So it also helps people understand how complex some of these are. Do you see the diversity of opinions on this question? But we have to come to a consensus. Doing a lot of brainstorming sessions, whether it's strategic planning or staff meetings. We also started doing a once a corner open office hours with senior leadership. So it's right at the end of the day as people are finished up and we're just sitting in a room. We offer 2 prompt questions, but it's open access if anybody wants to come and talk. And then we've also worked with providers to say this is the number of patients that we'd like you to see in a day, but work with us about how you want them distributed, which has been very popular. And friendship and belonging, again, I think some of these reiterate a little bit, just taking time for celebration. And I think one thing that we've done on some of our employee feedback is also recognizing relational work. So our accountant has a job around accounting, but she is also one of the most common people that other people go to for prayer. And we call that out on her employee review each year, is that that will never be on her job description, but it is essential to our culture and we want her to feel recognized and seen for that. Most of our staff give to our organization, so we also want them to experience us the way a donor would, that they get thank you letters also from our development team, that we share the impact of staff giving. I think it creates a buy-in to our culture that's really unique and doesn't happen everywhere. And so as a final reflection, as you look at that list and you take it out of here today, my hope would be that maybe you look at one of those spaces where you're I don't know that we have any strategies in this particular area, and that maybe there's 1 or 2 or something here that you can grab onto and develop for your organization. With that, I think we're right at time, but I have a couple minutes and I'm happy to stick around if there's more questions. And then that's also my email. I'd love to be in touch with anyone in our CCHF family. And I'd also love to learn from you as well. So thanks for showing up and for caring about culture. I think it has a huge impact on the work that we do. So thank you, everybody. And then a quick word on survey.
There's just 2 of us, so we'll walk around the room if you don't mind doing the survey. It really helps you do stuff and
Yeah, I'm happy to do questions while we do survey. Yes.
To navigate growth with the culture.
How to navigate.
How to navigate the growth. So going from
Yes.
clinic to 2 clinics or bigger clinics and maintaining the culture.
Yeah, I think that's really a hard question. It's one we've dealt with too. I think part of it too is working with your senior leadership and your department managers so that some of the practices that maybe aren't sustainable for the whole staff can be replicated or adapted for department meetings and department huddles, so that that some of those strategies and culture can live in smaller spaces as well. And also making sure that there's protected times for those smaller teams. Because you're right, if you have 100 employees, your best friend may not be someone in another department because you might not overlap as much. So you need to make sure that departments have that time as well. And I think too, I think apart from this, another thing that we worked really hard on is to make a kind of more flattened org structure with a larger leadership team that truly reflects all of what we do. So dental, medical, wellness, front office, all have a place at the table, so that when we're talking about strategy or we're saying, hey, this is an area that we scored a little lower, that it becomes a how do we fix this for providers and front desk and the farm team? And that we're all talking the same language, even if we may adapt the strategies differently. Other questions I can answer while you complete your evaluations? Awesome. Yeah.
About the birthday lab thing, where did you get
Yeah, Vivox, which is also what we use for our live polling. So you can do a word cloud, and you just have them, everyone pulls out their phone, scans the QR code, and then we have a question that's like, say your favorite thing about Cynthia. And then everyone just like goes, and then when you hit submit, it pops it up on the screen so people can see it. And we also use that like if we have a decision at the clinic, even around like benefits, like we've done polling on like what matters most, the deductible or the copay, so that we get feedback, and again, also so that staff can see what their peers are thinking and feeling on some of these issues. Vivox is anonymous, so you can get all your data, but everyone knows they're not being singled out or called by name. Awesome. Well, I think we are right at 5 now, so I really appreciate everyone's time today. Thanks so much.